The awakening call. The distress signal from Erebus 7 reached Terra Station at 3:47 hours, Earth Standard Time. What started as routine mining operations on a backwater moon had become humanity's worst nightmare in 17 minutes. Commander, Sarah Chen stood before the emergency council, her uniform still bearing scorch marks from her narrow escape. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the aftermath. Twisted metal that once housed 40,000 miners, engineers, and their families. The attack had been swift, brutal, and deliberate. No warnings, no demands, just systematic destruction. The raiders had targeted life support systems first, then communication arrays, leaving the colonists to suffocate in the dark before bombing the domes. Only 300 survivors made it to the emergency shelters. Chen had been off-world for a supply run, returning to find her home reduced to glowing craters. Council President Martinez leaned forward, his aged face etched with controlled fury. The other council members, representatives from Mars, Europa, and the Belt colonies, waited in tense silence. Chen activated her data pad, projecting sensor readings into the chamber's center. The attacking ships bore energy signatures they all recognized but had hoped never to see again. The Korvax Dominion had returned to human space after 50 years of uneasy peace. The Korvax were not unknown to humanity. First contact had occurred during humanity's initial expansion beyond Sol System. Where other species saw humans as curious newcomers, the Korvax saw prey. They were apex predators in their sector, maintaining control through fear and superior numbers. Their empire spanned 300 systems, built on the bones of species they deemed inferior. Humanity had fought them once before, barely achieving a stalemate that established neutral zones. Now those zones had been violated. Ambassador Thompson from the Diplomatic Corps stood slowly. His voice carried the weight of someone who had spent decades preventing exactly this moment. The Korvax Empire sent a message 30 minutes ago. They claim Erebus 7 was built on sacred ground, violating their religious sovereignty. They demand, we evacuate all frontier colonies within 30 days or face complete annihilation. A murmur ran through the chamber. The frontier colonies housed over 3 million humans across 17 systems. These were not military installations, but homes, schools, farms, humanity's future among the stars. The Korvax knew this. They had chosen their target carefully, striking at humanity's most vulnerable point to send a message of dominance. Chen stepped forward again, her voice cutting through the discussion. Council members, with respect, the Korvax made one critical error. They think we're the same species they encountered 50 years ago. They think our peace means weakness. She paused, meeting each council member's eyes. They don't know about the dragons. The chamber fell silent. The Dragon Protocol was humanity's most closely guarded secret, known only to the highest levels of government and military command. It was not a weapon or a ship class, but something far more dangerous. A recall order for every human who had served in the Void Wars, the conflicts that had forged humanity's reputation before the Korvax ever knew Earth existed. President Martinez stood, his decision already made. Commander Chen, you have authorization to initiate Dragon Protocol. Activation code Omega 77. The other council members nodded in agreement, understanding the gravity of what they were unleashing. The protocol would recall veterans from across human space, miners who once piloted assault craft, farmers who had commanded battleships, teachers who had been special forces. These were the humans who had faced extinction and refused to yield. Within hours, the message went out. Unencrypted channels reaching every human world and station. It was simple, just 5 words that would echo through history. The dragons have been summoned. Across human space, men and women looked up from their daily lives, remembering skills they had hoped never to use again. They kissed their families, goodbye, retrieved uniforms from storage, and began the journey to designated assembly points. The response was overwhelming. Within 72 hours, 800,000 veterans had reported for duty. Ships thought decommissioned powered, up in hidden shipyards. Weapons sealed away emerged from vaults. The peaceful facade humanity had maintained for half a century crumbled, revealing the sleeping giant beneath. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had survived when so many other species had fallen. On Fortress Station Alpha, Admiral Rebecca Stone surveyed the gathering fleet. She had been 15 when she first killed for humanity's survival, 70 now but still sharp as a blade. Around her, the Dragon fleet took shape, not the sleek regulation vessels of the regular Navy, but modified ships bearing scars and modifications from 100 battles. Each crew had their own ways of war, learned in conflicts the Korvax couldn't imagine. The Korvax response was predictable. They sent their herald ships to human borders, broadcasting threats and displaying their numerical superiority. 3,000 Korvax vessels against humanity's visible fleet of 800. They paraded their strength, expecting humanity to cower. Instead, they received a single transmission from Admiral Stone. You killed 40,000 civilians. Prepare to pay the price. What the Korvax didn't understand was that humans didn't fight like other species. They had learned from every conflict, adapted every strategy, absorbed every lesson. While other species relied on honor or tradition, humans relied on survival. The Dragon fleet wasn't just ships and soldiers. It was the concentrated experience of a species that had clawed its way from one planet to become a galactic power through sheer determination. Commander Chen took command of the strike cruiser Retribution, crewed entirely by Erebus 7 survivors. They had painted their ship black, with 40,000 small lights on its hull, one for each soul lost. As the fleet prepared to jump to the frontier, Chen broadcast on all frequencies. To the Korvax Dominion and any who would stand with them. You wanted to wake the dragons, congratulations, we're coming. The first jump took them to the Hydra system, where Korvax forward bases monitored human space. The enemy expected a traditional fleet engagement, battle lines, exchanges of fire, gradual attrition. Instead, they got the Dragon Doctrine, coordinated chaos. Human ships emerged from hyperspace at random points, each operating independently but somehow in perfect synchronization. Mining ships converted to bombers, passenger liners hiding railguns, cargo haulers deploying fighter swarms. The Korvax. Commander at Hydra sent confused reports back to their homeworld. The humans weren't following any known tactical doctrine. They attacked from every angle, retreated without pattern, struck at seemingly random targets that somehow crippled entire defensive networks. It was like fighting smoke that could bite. Within 6 hours, the Hydra system belonged to humanity, and the Korvax had lost 300 ships trying to understand what was happening. When dragons rise, the news of Hydra's fall spread through the Korvax Dominion like wildfire. Supreme Admiral Vextor called an emergency war council on their throne world, unable to comprehend the reports. 300 warships lost to a numerically inferior force. It was impossible. The Korvax had conquered species with fleets 10 times larger than humanity's. Their tactical superiority was absolute, their warriors bred for combat over millennia. What Vextor didn't understand was that humans hadn't just been farmers and colonists for the past 50 years. They had been preparing, learning, evolving. Every human child learned basic combat tactics in school, disguised as team sports and strategy games. Every colony ran emergency drills that were actually combat training. The species that had survived Earth's predators, ice ages, plagues, and their own violent nature had never truly relaxed their guard. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Remember Tomorrow, watching the tactical display as the Dragon fleet converged on Checkpoint Omega. This was where the real message would be sent. Omega was a major Korvax fleet base, home to their 7th Armada, 500 of their finest warships. The Korvax had reinforced it after Hydra, confident that concentrated firepower would stop the human advance. The Dragon fleet's approach was deliberately visible, giving the Korvax 3 days to prepare. They wanted the enemy to gather their forces, to feel confident in their superior numbers. Stone's strategy was not about tactics but psychology. The Korvax needed to understand that this wasn't a war they could win through conventional means. They needed to learn fear. As the fleets faced each other across the void, Vextor himself took command of the Korvax forces. His flagship, the Eternal, Predator was a masterpiece of warfare. 3 kilometers of armor and weapons never defeated in battle. He broadcast to the human fleet, his translator converting his clicks and hisses to words. Humans, you have had your small victory. Surrender now, and we will limit reprisals to military targets. Continue, and every human world will burn. Stone's response was to activate something the galaxy had never seen: the swarm doctrine. Every human ship suddenly deployed thousands of smaller craft, not fighters but autonomous drones. Each drone was barely larger than an escape pod, carrying minimal weapons but equipped with learning algorithms. They had been built in secret across human space, hidden in civilian manufacturing under false manifests. Now, 50,000 of them filled the space between the fleets. The Korvax laughed at first. Their point defense systems could handle fighters easily. But these weren't fighters. The drones learned from every shot fired at them, communicated with each other instantly, adapted their approach in real time. For every 100 destroyed, the rest became harder to hit. They swarmed over Korvax ships like insects, targeting specific systems with surgical precision. Weapons arrays went silent, engines failed, life support fluctuated. Meanwhile, the Dragon fleet's actual ships hung back, waiting. This was the human way: let the enemy exhaust themselves against an unexpected threat, then strike when they were confused and weakened. The Korvax fired everything they had at the drone swarm, their ammunition depleting, their crews growing frustrated and fearful. How could such small things be so effective? Then came the real attack. Dragon fleet ships didn't charge in formation. They jumped in and out of hyperspace in micro-jumps, appearing behind enemy vessels for seconds, firing, then vanishing. It was a tactic that should have been impossible. The power requirements alone should have burned out their drives. But human engineers had spent 50 years perfecting it, training crews to withstand the strain, modifying ships to handle the stress. Commander Chen's retribution appeared inside the Korvax formation, so close to the eternal predator that their shields merged. In those seconds of contact, she deployed boarding pods, not to capture the ship, but to deliver a message. The pods attached to the hull and projected holograms inside the Korvax flagship. Images of Erebus 7's destroyed colonies, the faces of 40,000 dead civilians, children's toys floating in vacuum. The psychological warfare was as effective as the physical assault. Korvax morale crumbled as they realized they weren't fighting a conventional military, but an entire species that had transformed grief into rage, loss into determination. Every human ship fought like its crew had nothing to lose because, in their minds, the Korvax had already taken everything by killing innocents. 6 hours into the battle, Vextor ordered retreat. Of his 500 ships, only 150 remained functional. The Dragon fleet had lost 30 vessels, but had disabled or destroyed 3 times their number. As the Korvax fled, Stone sent another message: run to your homeworld. Tell them the dragons are coming. Tell them to prepare their apologies or their graves. The journey to Korvax Prime took 2 weeks. Along the way, the Dragon fleet liberated 17 species the Korvax had enslaved, armed resistance movements, and shared tactical data. By the time they reached the Korvax throne world, they weren't alone. Ships from grateful species joined them, wanting to witness the fall of their oppressors. The fleet that arrived at Korvax Prime numbered over 2,000 vessels, but humanity didn't attack. They surrounded the planet and waited. Stone broadcast on every frequency to every Korvax citizen: your leaders killed human civilians. We could do the same to you, but we won't. We are not monsters. You have 1 hour to surrender your military leaders for trial, or we will disable every ship, every defense platform, every weapon on your world. You will be defenseless at the mercy of those you conquered. Choose. The Korvax civilian population, learning for the first time about the Erebus 7 massacre, rioted. They had been told humans were aggressors, that the war was defensive. Within 40 minutes, Vextor and his war council were dragged from their command center by their own people and delivered to the human fleet. The Korvax Empire, which had dominated a sector for 3,000 years, fell not to weapons but to the revelation of their own atrocities. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy. The Korvax leaders were not executed, but sentenced to rebuild Erebus 7 with their own hands, to spend their remaining years creating rather than destroying. It was a human justice that confused many species, mercy from those who had shown such devastating power. But it sent a clearer message than any execution could have. Admiral Stone's final address to the galaxy was simple. Humanity seeks peace, values life, and extends friendship to all. But remember this day. Remember what happens when you mistake our kindness for weakness, our peace for pacifism. The dragons sleep now, but they never die. Touch our innocence again and you won't face our military, you'll face our species. The dragon fleet disbanded, its veterans returning to their lives. Ships were powered down, weapons locked away, uniforms folded and stored. But across human space, in schools and homes, the story was told. Children learned that peace was precious, but never guaranteed that sometimes dragons must wake to protect what matters. The galaxy had learned too. Humans were not to be trifled with, not because they were the strongest, but because they would become whatever they needed to be to protect their own. Commander Chen returned to space, not as a warrior, but as an explorer, seeking new worlds for humanity to settle. But she kept her dragon insignia, a small reminder to any who might forget. The dragons had returned to sleep, but their eyes remained open, watching the stars, ready to rise again if needed. For in the end, it wasn't human weapons or tactics that defeated the Korvax. It was human nature itself, the refusal to yield, the determination to protect, the transformation of tragedy into triumph. The galaxy now knew, wake the human dragons at your own peril.